Good evening to those joining us again on Firing Line. I am William Buckley Jr., where tonight, as a rather delightful treat, we have returning as our guest the esteemed Dr. Anthony Fauci, who, as many may recall, had been so aptly described by Al Jazeera at the beginning of the current global public health crisis as the most trusted voice in America for distinguishing fact, as it were, from fiction. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
It is always a pleasure, Bill.
Yes, I am sure. And in our last rather pointed but still collegial exchange, we had discussed a hypothetical that I had posited regarding the very recent story that had been published by reporters at America's leading business publication, The Wall Street Journal, pertaining to the recent position advanced by the national laboratories and the Department of Energy, who had expressed a preference for the far less popularly accepted laboratory origins, or rather the lab leak theory for the emergence of the novel coronavirus, which that publication estimates to have been attributed to over 15 million fatalities worldwide. Rather large, extraordinary. More than twice the figure reported by the World Health Organization, and perhaps betraying some concerns that that organization that had declared our pandemic has been underestimating the global cost in lives, hiding the bodies, as some might say, for what now at least some are certainly entertaining more seriously the thought that such losses may have been the actual and direct result of what would be akin, as we had spoken about, to an industrial disaster, for which, at least on the left, many have demanded retribution and reparations for similar occurrences, a voice yet certainly not heard in over 3 years of a pandemic crisis, expressing a preference to attribute the loss to some natural occurrence or act of God, as some may prefer to say, and in whom many do not even believe, almost like blaming our problems on Santa Claus. So this evening, since the esteemed Dr. Anthony Fauci had appeared to be so very anxious to depart a hypothetically abstract discussion, and had preferred to address the praxis or the more contemporaneous aspects of this rather recent report, we shall begin first with your thoughts, Dr. Fauci, on the national laboratories from amongst what admittedly are the 17 official organizations, I believe, comprising the intelligence community of official record. What are your thoughts, Dr. Fauci, on this science-based organization preferring the, shall we say, lab leak, as it has been termed, over the certainly more preferred natural evolution that has been endorsed by so very many respected members of the scientific and medical communities, including yourself, Dr. Fauci?
Yes, Bill. And again, I am glad to be here this evening, and also glad that you have asked that very question. As you recall from all of the reports, all have stated that although the Department of Energy has expressed a preference, and I want to emphasize a preference for the lab leak theory and not the natural evolution, it is the opinion that they still hold with low confidence. And I think that is very important. Low confidence. The data speak for themselves.
Indeed, Dr. Fauci, low confidence. Is there any other kind one might ask, much like that entertaining exchange between the actor Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson in that film, A Few Good Men. Clear, crystal, as it were. However, as you also may recall, at the very beginning of the current public health crisis, as a part of what I do recall to be a rather thorough report, which I had the opportunity quite a few times to have read some 40 pages, which had been prepared by the World Health Organization after investigators had been dispatched to China. These 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists examining 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases that included amongst their major recommendations to other nations to fully educate the general public. And certainly, as you know, as a licensed and practicing medical professional, there are some terms of art quite unique to members of your profession, but esoteric to persons like myself who would not know what to do with a scalpel, like, say, the clinical distinctions between that which is efficacious and that which is effective, or even the clinical distinctions between symptoms that can only be discovered through diagnostic methods such as patient interviews and taking temperatures and the like, vis-a-vis asymptomatic signs of infection, which can be seen even by a layman who lacks any medical training at all. We know when we sneeze, and these are asymptomatic signs of infection, apparently in our pandemic, unnoticed by some who felt they needed to cover themselves with extra layers of protection. And at least from my experience, when engaged in discussions with members of the intelligence community, and I have had quite a few discussions there too, there are certain terms of art that may mean one thing in the mind of, say, a movie-going audience, with certainly a vast abundance of vicarious adventures in action films dancing around in their heads, but which may not find the same comprehension to an experienced operator or even analyst who have been, as they say, boots on the ground, eyes on the objective. I heard that in a movie. Surely you would agree. And so while you, at least from your resume, are not an intelligence professional, even if you may be working undercover tonight, as they say, and since the only incompetent evidence that could be presented would be the opinions of experts, perhaps you can share your thoughts on what this newest assessment in the news of low confidence means in your head. That's a little unfair, Bill. A dirty pool, as we see in Brooklyn. Yes, indeed. We have all been fully acquainted with the pollution problem in the city of New York, Doctor. But if you will, please continue, Dr. Anna Doctor. Of course, only joking. And I have actually done some homework myself on this rather important issue. And even the term intelligence community, as you will find, means different things within the intelligence community. But normally, in the minds of most Americans, we usually think of organizations like the CIA, or maybe even NSA, which technically is not actually on the list. However, when we speak distinctly using the terms of art, as you had said, that are very familiar to certainly intelligence and national security professionals, I want to point out that neither the FBI specifically nor the national laboratories, strictly speaking, whichever report, have now advanced the lab leak theory, are not even on the list specifically of the 17 recognized agencies comprising the recognized intelligence community, which come from many Department of Defense agencies primarily, as well as the State Department, the Department of Treasury, Homeland Security, and the Justice Department, which would include, as a very, very small part, the FBI and the Department of Energy, which again, of course, would include as a very small part of a larger whole, the national laboratories, and of course the independent executive authorities at the CIA, with whom we are all generally familiar.
And I believe, particularly in these discussions, it is wholly conceivable and probably even recognized by most that this distinction is very important. We have only two small factions of much larger intelligence agencies who certainly have general knowledge regarding certain aspects of science, and indeed its various applications to their work, but who have yet chosen, for their own reasons, not being political, to have refuted what record has been the predominant view of many well-respected professionals like myself within the medical community, to include not just myself, but also many notable epidemiologists, vaccinologists, virologists, microbiologists, and others who have dedicated their lives specifically to the study of disease and disease prevention. And I think, again, I want to stress that this is important, very important, and should carry some considerable weight over generalized, maybe even uninformed opinions.
Indeed, point well taken, Dr. Fauci, well stated. But yet you do concede that the, albeit very small part of the larger Department of Energy, which I may recall from my study of the subject so many years ago, it seems now, at least in my youth, a science, energy. I recall something about that in Einstein. And it is these members of that primarily science organization that have taken, at least to the level of a low competence, as often repeated in the press, a preference for theory regarding a lab leak hypothesis over the widely held and very popular view, which is the one that you hold in your head, if I may quote you again, Dr. Fauci, as I had in our last rather hypothetical discussion, that the most likely explanation is a natural evolution from an animal reservoir to human.
Precisely, Bill. And I believe that I can speak for the entire medical community on this when I say that the pioneering work by my distinguished colleague, Dr. Christian Anderson, a graduate of both Cambridge, a very reputable university, and Harvard, at the very beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, helped to lay the groundwork foundation for our discussions about the virus. Even today, having explored even the remote possibility of a laboratory origin, which I want to add, again, most members of the scientific community have resoundingly, almost monolithically, rejected, while still keeping an open mind, of course, like myself. And after a very thorough examination of various aspects of the virus, to include the polybasic purine cleavage site and O-link glycans, and speaking as not just a clinical researcher at the Scripps Research Laboratories, a very impressive credential in itself, but also as a professor of the Department of Integrative Structural and Computational Biology, and as a director of infectious disease genomics at the Translational Research Institute, which is certainly a mouthful to say. Dr. Anderson had concluded that, if I may be permitted to quote Bill, it is improbable that SARS-CoV-2 emerged through laboratory manipulation of a related SARS-CoV-like coronavirus.
Indeed, improbable, Dr. Fauci. And again, I do remind you that these terms do carry some level of significance for professionals, as we see almost 3 years later impacts, with many still debating that which is more probable, likely, conceivable, or dare say plausible, juxtaposed to that which is just simply farcical, ludicrous, and perhaps even comical.
Point well taken, Bill, and comical. And I am glad that you agree, because as a matter of fact, Dr. Anderson had stated that while the recombinant binding domain, or the RBD, of SARS-CoV-2 is optimized for binding to human ACE2 with an efficient solution different from those previously predicted, it was his expert opinion that, and again, if I may be permitted to quote, if genetic manipulation had been performed, one of the several reverse genetic systems available for beta coronaviruses would probably have been used. And they were not. And as a clinical researcher, very familiar with the prior works that have been performed, Dr. Anderson had concluded that the genetic data irrefutably show that SARS-CoV-2 is not derived from any previously used virus backbone.
Yet, Dr. Anthony Fauci, your colleague, Dr. Anderson, as has been reported, had himself, upon an early examination of the genome, along with his colleagues, also scientists examining the genome, had concluded that, if I may quote, they found the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, but within days had reversed his expert opinion. Yes, that is true, Bill. However, you too are also aware that Dr. Anderson, in a report that was published in very widely read and reputable New York Times, and had conceded that he, as well as his colleagues, had been unfamiliar with some other works that had clearly refuted his early conclusions, and perhaps understandably now causing some level of confusion, and had by that time explained his own evolution, if I may say, on the topic to reporters at the New York Times by July 2021. And since that time, Dr. Anderson, I might add, has been a co-author in not just one, but two related papers published in Science Journal in July 22, involving combined epidemiologic methods and genomics to map out the earliest known COVID cases based upon mathematical and stochastic models. And they found that cases centered on one particular live animal market in Wuhan, China, and that two slightly different variants had emerged there within just a few weeks. This implies, as recently explained in Slate magazine, that the virus was mutating in infected animals being sold on site rather than originating in research labs across the river. And so you see, Bill, based upon the science, clearly the natural evolution hypothesis is clearly the one that is more preferred, particularly by scientists who are far more familiar with the science, that the novel coronavirus, although very, very unique in many, many ways, was the product of a natural evolution. Models, you must agree, are not the science of empirical observations of data, raw data certainly, but a point well taken, Dr. Fauci. And you still yet first walk back your claim that as an expert, writing a definitive report that Dr. Anderson's vast experience had made him an expert, yet wholly unaware, apparently, with a body of knowledge that within just a matter of a few days found evolution under some pressure, persons in the scientific community finding cause to disabuse him of his previously held notions, and so we see crackpot theories. And further, as indeed you say, the virus was not derived from any previously used virus backbone in perhaps the open source, which would certainly have ruled out all works that have been published in prior experiments, published in the open source, such as the work conducted by Dr. Ralph Barrick on recombinant SARS coronaviruses being adapted to infect laboratory mice, say, and other works back in 2002, I believe, right before the SARS outbreak, and other works certainly widely available in the open source. But it is not significant. Is it not significant that this rather recent assessment, albeit of low confidence, as many have suggested and repeated in the press, had been derived from what has been called classified information possessed by those with, as they say, a need to know, which we must assume is not related to sources or methods, simply from a topic, as they say, and which assessment, again, from the scientists in the national laboratories, admittedly a very small part of the Department of Energy, a science organization, may be works with which those who are, shall we say, read on within the intelligence community, authors of these reports, might be in a far better position to hold some greater familiarity. And perhaps one might say that it is wholly conceivable that even if Dr. Anderson could not say in his report that the backbone for the virus had been used by known foundations published in past reports, that this virus, noted by at least one researcher, upon whom Sir Richard Dearlove, former MI6 director, had described as an etiology that was quite singular, may have been one of those perhaps used information scientists within the smaller intelligence community. And I believe, my lay opinion, that if this information is coming from not just the broader Department of Energy, but the national laboratories who would be involved in this type of work, but also this work in intelligence, they might be in a better position than, say, others just in the general science community. Just like in the FBI, many are not aware that you require either a law degree to become a G-man or a degree in the natural sciences, of which biology, at least as I may recall from my earlier years so long ago, would be certainly pertinent on this matter, especially in this matter that has been deemed to be classified. Why, yes, Bill, that is quite conceivable. However, again, based upon that evidence that is available, the only evidence that we can discuss, debate, and consider, and I might add that none of us have seen the contents of this intelligence report, so it is essentially off the table. The current view, and again, still keeping an open mind, is that this opinion had held a very, very low confidence, which I think is important. And as I have repeatedly stated, I, together with many highly qualified vaccinologists and virologists, including a recent paper by 21 internationally renowned virologists and evolutionary biologists from all over the world, indicate that although we keep an open mind, that it's possible that it could be, as they say, a lab leak, that the most likely explanation is a natural evolution from an animal reservoir to a human. A natural evolution from an animal reservoir to a human. And once you say that, which I believe is the more likely case, you've got to make sure you emphasize that you still keep an open mind for all possibilities, including the lab leak.
Yes, indeed. Dollar fountain. That, however, does not speak at all well to the exactitude that one would normally expect from science. Exact science, and which still finds us 3 years into a global public health crisis following that methodology, with perhaps as many as 15 million fatalities worldwide, as has been suggested by the Wall Street Journal, still trying to find a consensus decided by what appears to amount just to a popular election, and not necessarily amongst experts, and not that sound foundation upon which we had, at least in the past, described as the replicability and reproducibility and indeed constancy and certainty of science, and opening the door to questions as to whether even other candidates for a hypothesis regarding the origins have not even yet been included or will be included on this election ballot, to coin the term. And much in the scientific literature that at least I have found occasion to review during the crisis, when there was
quite literally little else to do other than read science reports, with worldwide closures of former options for entertainment upon your recommendation, indeed your expert recommendation, suggests at least the possibility, wholly conceivable, I should say, that the virus about which even the World Health Organization had concluded from their early examination of the empirical data that it is not clear whether this correlates with the presence of an infectious virus or disease being transmitted traditionally from person to person, and would reasonably appear to, therefore, lack not only the capability in gain of function, so to speak, to escape from a laboratory, hence well meriting a low competence assessment on that choice, or even in the alternative to have zoonotically evolved, as I say, to have set off a pandemic, leaving us with essentially a false dichotomy, choosing between two rather impossible origin theories, while either the zoonotic source or, dare say, the persons who had created what certainly would be the largest industrial accident in world history are permitted to, escape. But that, sadly, is all of the time that we now have this evening. And I would so much delight in having the opportunity, again, perhaps in the future, as I had with Dr. Benjamin Sprague, to determine whether you carry in your head a comparison of the number of people who have died during this century from disease in contrast to those who have died not from war, but from persecution. For instance, the 6 million dead in Nazi Germany, a figure which now we have surpassed with a pandemic in half the time, or perhaps even from similar, perhaps industrial accidents about which there remains the possibility that some, preferring to escape accountability, have blamed on nature or even, dare say, God, if you prefer, with carte blanche. And in the alternative, even as Dr. Anderson, your esteemed colleague, had concluded regarding the natural evolution hypothesis, we might close with this quote to consider. Failure to comprehensively investigate the zoonotic origin through collaborative, which would mean an interchange of ideas, opening discussion, and carefully coordinated studies, would leave the world still yet vulnerable to future pandemics of similar costs and results and outcomes adverse, arising from the very same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. Novel viruses, indeed. And Dr. Rochelle Walensky, another colleague of yours, have said this virus isn't stupid, but human choices have not served us well. Dr. Fauci, thank you so very much for now. Thanks also to our many viewers. And please feel free to join us in our next discussion on issues of interest on Firing Line. This is William F. Buckley, Jr., and it has been quite a delight. Good evening. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.